Welcome to Spoken Injustice, where we put the criminal justice system in the dock. This video is part of our news session, unsurprisingly focused on the post office scandal, which has finally spiraled in a well overdue media frenzy. Our headline news, failure to deliver, carries an abundant touch of irony, with pun absolutely intended. We will first give a brief timeline of the scandal to assist us in exploring what caused this scandal. Then we will attempt to shed light on the least obvious culprits who have so far evaded the headlines. And finally, we will discuss the necessary steps moving forward. So do follow us until the end as we attempt to present this news under a different light. Let's first start with a brief timeline of the scandal. The Post Office Limited is a public-owned subsidiary of the Royal Mail Holdings. It has over 11,000 branches across the UK, of which 1% are directly managed by the Post Office, and the remaining 99% are managed by franchise partners known as sub-post masters and sub-post mistresses. Prior to 1999, Post Office branches relied on a paper-based accounting system. In 1999, Horizon, a software accounting system developed by a company owned by Fujitsu, was piloted by the Post Office. In 2000, the Post Office started to roll this system out to branches. Almost immediately, sub-post masters and sub-post mistresses began to note faults with the new system, but any attempts to raise these concerns were met with harsh prosecutions by the Post Office. Between 1999 and 2014, almost 900 prosecutions were brought by the Post Office in its capacity of private prosecutor under Section 6 of the Prosecution of Offences Act 1985. Of the 900 prosecutions, more than 700 resulted in convictions. The Post Office action did not lead only to convictions, but also to hundreds of suspensions and terminations of sub-post masters' contracts, which led, in many cases, to bankruptcy. On the 11th of May 2009, an article, "Bankruptcy, Prosecution and Disrupted Livelihoods, Postmasters Tell Their Story," was published by Rebecca Thompson of Computer Weekly. The article did not garner sufficient publicity, and the Post Office continued prosecuting. In the meantime, Alan Bates, a former sub-post master and one of the victims of this scandal, set up the Justice for Sub-Post Masters Alliance, the JFSA. In 2012, the JFSA seemed to have made some progress in raising awareness of its plight and attracted the attention of Lord Arbuthnot. Succumbing to the mounting pressure, the Post Office agreed to appoint an independent firm of accountants, Second Sight, to get to the bottom of the issues raised by the JFSA. Second Sight, having taken very seriously its instructions to produce a truly independent report into the Post Office actions, found that in fact what the Post Office truly wanted was Second Sight to deliver a pack of lies and make the problem go away. But they did not cave in and raised disclosure concerns higher up, which in February 2015 led to these issues being animatedly ventilated at an evidence hearing before the Business, Innovation and Skills Committee, where Ian Henderson of Second Sight told the committee that the post office was being obstructive in handing over prosecution files. At that hearing, Paula Venables, who was the post office's chief executive from 2012 to 2019, maintained before the committee that the Horizon system was in fact robust and that there was no evidence of miscarriages of justice. In March 2015, the post office, without obvious and public explanation, sacked Second Sight. It is also in 2015 that finally the media started to show some timid interest in the matter. The first BBC Panorama investigation is aired, but not without obstructions by the post office, and Private Eye reports on the scandalous dismissal without further explanation of Second Sight. 2015 is also the year when many criminal convictions were referred to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. However, despite this, the scandal fails to garner adequate public attention until December 2019, when, following a civil action orchestrated in 2017 by the JFSA, Mr. Justice Fraser's landmark judgment is handed down in the matter of Bates and others and Post Office Limited. At paragraph 929, Mr. Justice Fraser states that the Post Office approach to counter claims that the Horizon system was faulty has amounted in reality to bare assertions and denials that ignore what has actually occurred, at least so far as the witnesses called before me in the Horizon Issues trial are concerned. He said it amounts to the 21st century equivalent of maintaining that the earth is flat. On the 3rd of June 2020, the CCRC wrote to the Justice Select Committee asking to undertake an inquiry to examine the effectiveness of safeguards in place to regulate private prosecutions in England and Wales. The Select Committee report was published in October 2020 with several recommendations. On the 4th of March 2021, the government published its response declining all but one of the recommendations in the Select Committee report. You can find out more about private prosecutions in our video titled Private Prosecutions Problem Solved, linked in the description below. On 23rd of April 2021, the Court of Appeal quashed 39 Post Office convictions in the matter of Joe Hamilton and the Post Office. The Court of Appeal concluded that failures of investigation and disclosure by the Post Office Limited were so egregious as to make the prosecution of any of the Horizon cases an affront to the conscience of the court. Through this concise examination of the timeline, it is evident how the scandal unfolded and the factors that permitted it to fester for over 2 decades. First, the Post Office, acting as a private prosecutor, clamorously failed in fulfilling disclosure obligations, prioritizing private interests over the pursuit of justice. Secondly, the media fell significantly short in achieving its crucial goal of raising awareness, succumbing to the fear of legal consequences from private entities such as Fujitsu. Thirdly, social media appears to have been swallowed by algorithms. The JFSA YouTube page has to date only 493 subscribers with a total of 133,296 views since its inception in 2012. 2020. Fourthly, the legal profession as a whole failed to administer justice, entangled in the web of legal jargon. I was taken aback on the 24th of May 2021 when, in the aftermath of the Court of Appeal overturning 39 post office criminal convictions, I attended an event organised by the all-party parliamentary group on Miscarriages of Justice titled Rebuilding from the Rubble, Compensation for Miscarriages of Justice. Jo Hamilton, one of the courageous postmistresses caught in this scandal, and her lawyer shared their testimonies. The entire event was eerily low-key. Granted, we were still operating under COVID lockdown restrictions, but I couldn't help but wonder why Miss Hamilton's story was engracing the front pages of every newspaper and why she hadn't yet received compensation. Ultimately, it took a drama broadcasted via the most enduring and trusted medium, the television, to finally convey the message loud and clear. Why? Because the main character in the drama wasn't a politician or a member of the affluent elite, but rather an ordinary, hard-working individual striving to make ends meet, paying taxes, and whose voice held no sway in a criminal court, in a newspaper article, or the House of Parliament. However, when through the power of that drama, that singular voice echoed into millions, CBEs were relinquished and new legislations were proposed. This is ultimately what humanizing wrongful convictions is all about. As we stated before, humanizing wrongful convictions involves recognizing and acknowledging the profound impact these miscarriages have on individuals and society. It goes beyond legal aspects and statistics. It involves literally digging into the personal stories and experiences of those who have been wrongfully convicted, and that is exactly what Gwyneth Hughes, the writer of the ITV drama, ultimately achieved. In an article by The Guardian dated the 9th of January 2024, Miss Hughes stated that drama had the power of direct visceral appeal to audiences. It's for reaching out across the stage or through the screen, grabbing you by the throat and saying, "Care about me." And when it works, it's incredibly powerful. In this case, it's been put to the service of this terrible event in our country's history. If you want to really get people's attention, tell them a story, and in this case, a true story. I hope you're finding this video compelling so far, and if so, before moving into our second part of this video, where we will attempt to identify the real culprits of this scandal, hit the like button below to allow us to reach a wider audience, and subscribe to our channel to support our mission to humanize wrongful convictions. Thank you. The timeline sheds light on the heroes of this scandal. First and foremost, the brave supermasters and supermistresses of the JFSA, led by Mr. Bates, who fought with perseverance against this indescribable injustice and did not succumb to the abuse of power. But also journalists like Rebecca Thompson, Ian Hislop, Nick Wallace, and true professionals who took their job seriously, like Ian Henderson of Second Sight. The timeline also shines a light over the villains behind this scandal, including past and current leaders and ministers of the Post Office, as well as parliamentarians spanning various political spectrums. Nevertheless, it is crucial that we direct our focus on the defendant in our metaphorical dock, the criminal justice system. Despite my reluctance as a fellow lawyer to highlight this, the Post Office scandal is an indictment on the entire legal profession, encompassing prosecutors, defense practitioners, and ultimately the judiciary as custodians of justice. Let's start with the prosecutors. It is clear that they failed egregiously to competently advise on reasonable lines of inquiries that ought to have been followed, to discharge their disclosure obligations, and to get to grips with the required evidence standard. I've heard many comments pointing a finger at Fujitsu, whilst no doubt Fujitsu had its part in it. As Mr. Justice Fraser stated at paragraph 1018 of his long judgment handed down in December 2019, the Post Office ought to have known how its own system works. We have highlighted all these issues in our video titled Post Office Scandal Lost in the Maze, which you can find linked in the description below. A second mention on this indictment goes to the defense practitioners. It is puzzling how so many people were advised and allowed to plead guilty to crimes they did not commit. Supposed masters and supposed mistresses were led to believe that it was acceptable that they pleaded guilty to false accounting. For false accounting to amount to a criminal offence, evidence of intent and dishonesty is required. And in these cases, such evidence was totally absent. However, ultimately, whom should we truly hold accountable for what Post Office Minister Kevin Hollenrich described as a brutal and arbitrary exercise of power? The ultimate gatekeeper in the administration of justice is the judiciary. After all, it is the judge who must decide whether a prosecutor has discharged its obligation as to the burden of proof. It is the judge who decides whether a defendant is being afforded a fair trial. It is deeply disconcerting and unsettling to comprehend how, in more than 700 cases, judges failed to inquire about the whereabouts of these missing funds, or did not rigorously demand solid evidence to substantiate the asserted and repeatedly claimed reliability of this supercomputer system. Effectively, the Post Office asserted the supposed masters had stolen money. Instead of presenting compelling evidence through computer trails, it forced the burden of proving innocence on the supposed masters. Despite numerous requests from several supposed masters and supposed mistresses for the disclosure of error logs, such requests were denied. In doing so, the prosecutor not only unjustly reversed the burden of proof, but also, by withholding computer logs, hindered their ability to meet this burden of proof improperly and unjustly imposed on them. He would have fallen onto the judge of first instance to point out that the prosecution had not adequately met the burden of proof and accordingly stay the proceedings. In other words, the judge should have said, "We cannot simply take your word that the system is robust. You need to prove that the system is robust." In the matter of Regina and Seema Misra, Miss Misra's defense team brought to the attention of various judges on many occasions the issue of failed disclosure in relation to the Horizon error logs. The final attempt was before the trial judge, His Honour Judge Stewart, on the 8th of October 2010, on day 6 of the trial, just after the prosecution rested its case. Defence counsel contended that Miss Misra could not have had a fair trial due to the failure of disclosure of the error codes. This is what defence counsel said at page 21. He, Mr. Jenkins, accepted he had not seen any supporting documents, had not seen the reports attached which should have been attached, had not seen the raw material which had been downloaded according to this log on the 22nd of September 2005, which could have been available to him if he had taken it from the archives, but had not. So the Crown rely upon the evidence of Mr. Jenkins to say we can exclude any problems which could have occurred upon the assertions or accounts given by Mr. Jenkins, who himself cannot be confident that it is correct. Mr. Jenkins has also explained to the court that he operates under a restriction because he is an employee of Fujitsu who are under contract to the post office, and he can only comply with his contractual terms as best he can, and there is no suggestion his integrity is anywhere at fault as to what he is permitted to do, bearing in mind this is a post office prosecution. I don't go behind that, but it is not an independent prosecution at arm's reach from the loser company and Mr. Jenkins. So we have concern as to the quality of this evidence, the best he has done in regard to the restrictions he operates under. Despite that, the judge ruled against and determined that the trial was fair. Truly shocking. Miss Misra was convicted and sentenced on her son's 10th birthday to 15-month imprisonment. She was pregnant with her second son when she was sent to prison. She said that had she not been pregnant, she would have contemplated suicide. Judges are gatekeepers. The judiciary has for too long sought refuge behind the comfortable cloak of independence, abstaining from taking action when it was required and adopting a pusillanimous stance when ought to have criticized prosecutors, whether they were public or private. Instead, we had to wait until 2019 when a High Court judge, Mr. Justice Fraser, finally started asking the pertinent questions for the scandal to finally unravel in favour of the many supposed masters and supposed mistresses. That judgment was then the catalyst for the quashing of the 39 criminal convictions in the case of Hamilton and others and Post Office on the 23rd of April 2021. At paragraph 137 of that judgment, the Court of Appeal states, "In those circumstances, the failures of investigation and disclosure were, in our judgment, so egregious as to make the prosecution of any of the Horizon cases an affront to the conscience of court. By representing Horizon as reliable and refusing to countenance any suggestion to the contrary, POL, Post Office Limited, effectively sought to reverse the burden of proof. It treated what was no more than a shortfall shown by an unreliable accounting system as an incontrovertible loss and proceeded as if it were for the accused to prove that no such loss had occurred, denied any disclosure of material capable of undermining the prosecution case. Defendants were inevitably unable to discharge that improper burden. As each prosecution proceeded to its successful conclusion, the asserted reliability of a horizon was, on the face of it, reinforced. Defendants were prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced on the basis that their horizon data must be correct and cash must therefore be missing, when in fact there could be no confidence as to that foundation. Since then, only 93 convictions have been quashed. So, having cast some light on what went wrong, how can we now make it right? First, we must acknowledge and accept that some of the consequences flowing from the scandal cannot be corrected. The harm inflicted upon these numerous innocent individuals cannot be undone by any measures we now endeavour to implement. Indeed, individuals who died as a result of this cannot be brought back to life. Chronic illnesses resulting from it cannot be cured. And marriages that have been broken cannot be restored. In other words, the human cost cannot be restored. Secondly, immediate focus must be placed on taking actions directed at rebuilding reputations, assisting with improving physical and mental health, and restoring financial conditions. We are in the process of commissioning a pilot study on moral injuries. To know more about moral injuries, watch this video linked in the description below. Any victim affected by this scandal who wishes to volunteer can contact us via our networking hub at spokeninjustice.net. There is no doubt that overturning the convictions of over 600 surplus masters and surplus mistresses wrongly convicted and properly compensating them must be the priority. On the 10th of January 2024, the headlines of a combined press release by the Ministry of Justice, Alex Chalk KC and Rishi Sunak MP, brought about by mounting public pressure following the ITV drama, reads: hundreds of innocent postmasters who were wrongfully convicted due to the Horizon scandal will have their name cleared under new laws to be brought forward by the government. We are not sure that an en masse action is the right answer for the following reasons. Firstly, this action will only assist those who were convicted, but will not extend to those who, though not convicted, had nonetheless experienced similar grave consequences when their contracts were terminated. Secondly, a legislative measure will cover only England and Wales and will not apply to those who were prosecuted in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Thirdly, and most importantly, it will leave some doubt as to the innocence of those exonerated. The same announcement of the 10th of January reads: the government recognises that this bill may lead to the overturning of some convictions that were rightfully brought. In line with the wishes of some of the victims, the government will therefore introduce safeguards to make sure anyone who was rightly convicted and is now trying to take advantage of compensation schemes can be prosecuted in the future. This safeguard is, in our view, not sufficient to dispel doubts and will not give appropriate closure to each victim. Also, these solutions did not meet universal approval by the victim. Tracy Felstead, for example, who was only 19 years old when she was wrongfully convicted and imprisoned, told the BBC that while the process of helping former postmasters need to be sped up, she cautioned against a mass exoneration. I think we need to be really careful that we are not just going to go and turn everybody's convictions over just in case you have that one person that has committed a crime and you have just turned over their conviction, she said. But what is the alternative? Sending all these cases via the usual route of CCRC investigations and referrals to the Court of Appeal doesn't seem to be a suitable solution either, as it will further strain an already overwhelmed system and result in prolonged delays. And what about an equivalent remedy for those whose contracts were terminated and faced bankruptcy? Whatever action is to be taken, instead of hastily reacting to public outrage, the government should this time attentively heed the voices that were silenced for 2 decades, disregarded by Parliament, the government, the media and the criminal justice system. The voices of the victims themselves. And what do you think? Does this seem fair to you? Let me know in the comments below. Thirdly, holding those responsible accountable is an important part of restoration and a good deterrent to ensure the scandals such as this do not keep repeating. The absence in the UK of adequate measures for accountability within both the criminal justice system and the government is alarmingly evident. Therefore, it is essential to channel the existing public pressure towards compelling Parliament to address these shortcomings. In the meantime, and with the means currently available, we understand that the police are investigating the Post Office. An article by The Guardian dated the 5th of January 2024 states the Post Office is under criminal investigation over potential fraud offences committed during the Horizon scandal, the Metropolitan Police have confirmed for the first time. Officers are investigating potential fraud offences arising out of these prosecutions, for example, monies recovered from sub-postmasters operators as a result of prosecutions or civil actions, Scotland Yard said on Friday evening. It is not clear whether the investigation relates to individual staff members or the Post Office as a corporate entity. Whether the criminal investigation will extend into the Post Office's conduct calculated to undermine justice remains to be seen. Finally, what needs to be changed within the criminal justice system so that this does not happen again? Based on our analysis, we can assert with confidence that preventive measures are already in existence, making it possible to avert scandals such as this. If prosecutors had adhered to codes and guidance, if defense counsels hadn't yielded to a culture of readily accepting guilty pleas, and if judges had prioritized listening to individuals rather than unquestioningly trusting powerful organizations, the scandal could have been prevented. This reinforces our repeated mantra that our focus should be on changing the operators of the system rather than the machine itself. Nevertheless, we acknowledge and have consistently emphasized over the past year that the current state of affairs concerning private prosecutions is utterly unacceptable. If you want to know more about private prosecutions and the Justice Select Committee recommendations, you can watch our video titled Private Prosecutions Problem Solved, linked in the description below. We are pleased to see that this issue has finally met some interest within the media. The headlines in several articles by The Guardian read: Top lawyer urges MPs to review private prosecutions after post office scandal. Bar Council Chair Sam Townmead KC says Parliament should consider formal regulation of growing practice. And another article: plans to reform private prosecutions after post office Horizon scandal. Improved oversight and a law to strip organisation of their power to take people to court are among measures gaining cross-party support. In May 2021, in the wake of the second judgment of the Court of Appeal in Hamilton and others and the Post Office Limited, in his written evidence to the Justice Select Committee on Private Prosecutions, Mr. Stephen Wooler CB wrote, equally important, the court's findings should dissipate any lingering complacency that what happened in the post office cases can be regarded as a one-off. In some senses, the scandal was unique, but could not have happened without our permissive regime, which allows uninspected persons to prosecute and trusts that defendants will be able to expose wrongdoing before it is too late. Moreover, such misfeasance over the course of a decade can hardly be characterized as a one-off. In fact, England and Wales is probably alone in allowing private individuals and corporate entities an almost unfettered right to exercise what is fundamentally a state power responsibility. The strongest single message in jurisdictions where the rule of law prevails is that prosecutions and punishment of crime is fundamentally a public state responsibility to be discharged fairly, objectively, and impartially by or on behalf of public authorities in the interest of society as a whole, the public interest. The anomalous nature of the England-Wales position is emphasized by the subjection of the main investigation and prosecution bodies to inspection, whilst leaving private prosecutions unregulated. That seems as logical as Ofsted inspecting state schools but not private schools, or CQC inspecting the NHS but not private hospitals. Now it has proven that a private company, Post Office Limited, was more in need of inspection than anyone, but the inquiry will come only years after possibly hundreds of miscarriages of justice were perpetrated. Things can go wrong under any arrangement. For example, the zeal of Customs and Excise that led to the Butterfield Review, serious disclosure failures within police and the CPS. However, oversight arrangements where they exist can provide accurate assurance that prosecutors generally are acting to appropriate professional standards in terms of transparency, competence, independence, and fairness, and so reduce the inherent risk. Risk is at its greatest when a prosecutor has a vested financial interest in the outcome of the proceeding. The Post Office is a prime example. We hope that the government will finally look at the recommendations made by the Just Select Committee. I hope you found this video interesting, and if so, please like it to allow a wider circulation, and if you have not done so already, Please subscribe to this channel to be part of our community and help us with our mission to humanize wrongful convictions. Also, join our networking hub at spokeninjustice.net. Your presence will add another powerful voice to our ongoing conversation about making positive change and addressing the shortcomings in our criminal justice system. Join us again next week. We look forward to usher you as we sit and rise in this unique trial.